I have chosen to analyze the text "The Man Who Loved Flowers" by Stephen King. At this screencast, I will come around the following focusing points: summary, characterization of our main character, setting, horror elements, and comparison at last. So I'll start out giving a little summary of the text. The story takes place in May 1963 on an early and very beautiful evening in the streets of New York. Here we follow our main character, Love, as he calls himself. He's a young man who appears to be very much in love, according to people around him. The young man's purpose on this very evening is to meet his girlfriend, Norma, who he is crazy in love with. The young man goes to a flower vendor to buy some flowers for Norma, and while he is at the flower vendor, the vendor's radio drones on about a war simmering in a small country called Vietnam, and that there is a hammer murderer loose in the streets of New York. The young man does not give the bad news any further thoughts and walks away after buying a bucket of flowers for Norma. The young man is moving on, and the sky is turning darker, and now the stars are beginning to show. The young man turns into an alley where he sees a young woman. He is sure that this very young woman is Norma, which makes his heart ache and his face so much happier. Norma, he says, with overwhelming happiness, "I've bought flowers for you." The woman looked up, smiling, and said, "You must be mistaken. My name is not..." And that was all she managed to say before the young man pulled out a hammer from his pocket and killed her. She tried to scream, but it was too late. The young man landed his first hammer hit before the sound from her scream got out. His girlfriend Norma has been dead for 10 years now, but the young man, he cannot accept that, and therefore he keeps trying on to find her. He keeps on trying to find her, and it demands several sacrifices. Now I'll give a characterization of the main character. Our main character, the young man, he is surprisingly enough a young man, and he has dark and short-cut hair. He has light blue eyes and a fair complexion. Nothing extraordinary, but beautiful in the twilight. And the young man, he is wearing a light gray suit with a narrow tie and his top collar bottom undone. And we have an example here. He had that look about him. He was dressed in a light gray suit, the narrow tie pulled down a little, his top collar bottom undone. His hair was dark and cut short. His complexion was fair, his eyes a light blue. Not an extraordinary face, but on this soft spring evening, on this avenue in May of 1963, he was beautiful. And the young man, he seems like a quite ordinary and peaceful man at the beginning of the story. He brings nothing but joy and love with him. And this can be seen with this example here. The vendor's face was normally sour, but now he smiled a little, just as the old woman pushing the groceries had, because this guy was such an obvious case, and this guy is the young man. But the young man's personality makes a drastic change when he suddenly pulls out a hammer from his pocket without saying anything and kills the young lady in cold blood. This gives us a completely new and different view on our main character. We realize that he must be some kind of schizophrenia. There was a hint earlier in the story. Here we can conclude that, here's the example. He hesitated, looked over his shoulder, and thought it over. He reached into his coat pocket and touched the something in there again. For a moment his face seemed puzzled, lonely, almost haunted, and then As his hand left the pocket, it regained its former expression of eager expectation. Here we see that he is schizophrenia, because we can conclude that the something in his pocket must have been his hammer. And right when he touched that hammer, his personality changed completely in a split second, because his face turned puzzled, lonely, and almost haunted. And then it turned back to its former expression of eager expectation when he released that grip from the hammer. And the young man, he called himself Love. And I think he does that because love can both be a good and a bad thing. Love is probably the strongest feeling that exists, and it is often associated with something idyllic and beautiful. But love can also be one of the most hurtful and terrible things in life, which is two very opposite points of view on the same case. And our main character, he is schizophrenia, and therefore love is a perfect nickname for him, because love can be two very different things, but love is mostly affected by the positive things, and then that's also what's happening for the young man's personality, because he is mostly a nice and ordinary guy, but when he touches that hammer, he turns into something completely different. And now I'll talk about the setting. The story takes place in New York, and therefore we can quickly conclude that it's an urban environment. The story is ongoing on an early evening. It is spring and the dusk is beginning to fall. It's a beautiful night and everyone is just smiling and sending out good vibes. And it seems to be a perfect night to take a walk in the streets of New York. And here we have an example at the beginning. On an early evening of May 1963, a young man with his hand in his pocket walked briskly up New York's 3rd Avenue. The air was soft and beautiful. The sky was darkening by slow degrees from blue to the calm and lovely violet of dusk. There are people who love the city, and this was one of the nights that made them love it. Everyone standing in the doorways of the delicatessens and dry cleaning shops and restaurants seemed to be smiling. But the setting in the story, it changes a lot throughout the story, together with our main character. When he walks towards the murky alley, the setting changes from a perfect and idyllic night to a dark and more sinister night. And while he is murdering the woman, darkness engrosses and swallows the environment completely. And now I'll talk about the horror elements. Stephen King, he is making use of suspense and surprise as his primary horror elements in the story. He uses suspense when the young man pulls out his hammer and kills the young woman in cold blood. While he is hitting the young woman with the hammer, cats are screaming and darkness is taking over both the young man's mind and the environment. And we have an example here. And he swung the hammer to stop the scream, to kill the scream, and as he swung the hammer, the spill of flowers fell out his hand. The spill spilled and broke open, spilling red, white, and yellow tea roses beside the dented trash cans, where the cats made alien love in the dark, screaming in love, screaming. And Stephen King, he's also using surprise when he finds out that the nice young man suddenly is the hammer murderer. When the young man heard about the loose hammer murderer in the streets, he mentioned that it was bad news. when he heard it in the radio at the flower vendor. And therefore it is very surprising that he is the hammer murderer. It makes it scarier that a young man like him is the murderer, because he could be anyone. He could be an ordinary young man you meet in the street. Stephen King has made many people look over their shoulder when walking alone in the streets after reading this story. I am certain of that. And now I'll make a comparison with another text we read earlier in the year called The Boogeyman, also written by Stephen King. We see the same horror elements in The Boogeyman, because Stephen King uses both surprise and suspense in The Boogeyman. When Mr. Billings, he's going to the Dr. Harper's secretary to get a new appointment, but there was no secretary in the room. And when Mr. Billings returned to the Dr. Harper's office, there was no one either. But the closet door was open, just a crack, and then the boogeyman came forth. The suspense is used by Mr. Billings suddenly being alone in a completely empty psychologist's office at night, without anyone answering his questions and confusion. And the surprise is used when the boogeyman comes out the closet with a face mask of Dr. Harper in his hand.